Ja. Bom dia, soy Alberto. Buenos días a todos, me llamo Alberto y como han dicho, no hablo para nada el catalán y hablo muy mal el español. Entonces me perdonen, voy a intentar de hablar en inglés. Si no entienden algo, por favor me interrumpen, me pregunten, parlando lentamente. Creo que voy a comprender ustedes y vemos. Bueno, lo que quiere hacer aquí es de poner juntos los dos temas del día, el del Open Government y el de los Big Data. Para que no es claro que tienen mucho que ver lo uno con lo otro, pero yo creo que sí. So, at the heart of my work, and I am here with a sort of civil society hat, I am on the board of a small Italian NGO called Italia that cares about open government, is the idea that public policies don't really work all that well. The dimension of failure is pervasive at all scales of intervention, from the large structural project to the small but important problems just outside our door. Failure seems to be endemic. Just read any newspaper or just look around. Now, of course, different failures have different origins, right? But there seems to be a sort of superior reason that pushes even the most competent, the most honest, and the best-meaning administration towards high failure rates. And what would that mean? Well, maybe this is because the world has simply become too complex. Government is objectively complex in the sense that everything we do is subject to a lot of constraints: financial, environmental, demographic. There's constraints about security, about energy, about social cohesion. There's constraints on the short term, on the medium term, on the long term. There's lots of constraints. It's really difficult. But also, government is subjectively complex. And what I mean by that is everything you do in government, from an ambitious reform to replacing a traffic light with a roundabout in some suburb of Terrassa, is going to be subject to scrutiny, critique, and sometimes protest. And this has led, in the past years, in the past decades, to a growing sense of powerlessness, of inadequacy of all public decision makers. You thought it was Spain? It's not. It's everybody. Well, at least it's every Western democracy. Dictatorships have some sort of other ways to get around. So, some of us have proposed to try and solve this deadlock by using large-scale collaboration between citizens and institutions. If you pull them together, the citizens of a modern democracy, who tend to be highly educated, have incredible reserves of knowledge on just about anything you can think about, of very granular information about the territories because they live there, and of civic passion. Citizens typically can and want to help make public decision faster, more informed, and ultimately more effective. The problem is how you do it. And sure enough, until now, this vision didn't really come true. We know we have participatory democracy, but we also know participatory democracy does not really scale. You can govern a village by it, but a planet, forget it. Not even a medium-sized city. But now we have a new tool. We have the social internet's instruments for mass collaboration. And these instruments work really well because they lower the cost for citizens to participate. Used to be you had to take half a day off to go to a town meeting. Now it can be just 5 minutes to leave a careful comment on an online forum. Also, these instruments reward the best contributions with peer recognition and social appreciation. But most importantly, they allow each person to speak out exactly on the things that she is more knowledgeable about and that she's more passionate about. In other words, they allow each of us to speak out on what we want, when we want to do so. And the best example of processes like this, not in government, is of course Wikipedia. Wikipedia, English Wikipedia, is by now and by far the largest encyclopedia ever written in the history of humanity. It's got more than 4 million entries, 17 million contributors. Each contributor decides in absolute freedom whether to edit an entry, which entry to edit, and when. This great freedom produces great efficiency because it pairs contributors, people, to contributions, entries, and it does so without anybody in the system needing to keep track of who knows what and who cares about what. This is just an emergent property of Wikipedia. Many people are working about trying to port this way of collaborating to government. If we succeed, well, arguably we'll make public policies better, administration more open, and democracy stronger. And this is what we call open government. By the way, and this is confirmed by what today we have been saying, everyone who has done this seriously agrees that there is tremendous intellectual firepower in any large crowd of citizens. Way above anything a small group working in a company or in an administration can achieve. This is what Jordi was saying, or Maria Jesus. The evidence is in, we are not giving this up. The point is just how we do it better, not whether to do it. Now, how does all this connect with data? Well, it does, because you see, electronic networks, just as they are used to build open and transparent government, are also used for very many other human activities. And here, a purely technological factor comes into play. So go back for a moment in the time when we had analog network, for example, an analog phone network. When you called the restaurant to book your dinner on one of those networks, what you did was create an electric circuit between your phone and the restaurants. Once you hang up, the circuit went away. The system did not need memory to function. Now, on a digital network, however, it works differently. You have to have a file somewhere that tells the system to connect exactly your phone to exactly the restaurant's phone. Now, all you need to do is not to delete the file, and you have perfect memory of what the system did. With electronic networks, when you do something, you get monitoring of that something almost for free. And this has generated a deluge of low-cost data. And the availability of cheap data, in turn, has generated a new centrality of data, which is why many of us are here today. Mark has said it before, data are the new oil. This is a quotation actually not by Kreuz, but by marketing author Clive Hamby in 2006. And this phrase was echoed by many people, including people in this room. Centrality of data means, for example, this. Prestigious media like The Guardian or the New York Times are hiring statisticians and infographic artists, and they're giving rise to a new genre, which is called data journalism. The transparency movement, and many of us here would recognize ourselves in that movement, has spawned the open data movement, which is mostly about getting government to share its data on the web and in open format. And health and fitness enthusiasts have given rise to another kind of movement, the quantified self movement, as it is called, where people pursue their goal of health, beauty, and athletic performance by monitoring their own body and sharing the data they generate in this way. Unsurprisingly, all of these cultures have given rise to a galaxy of, well, data, of course, but software tools to use them, and also, by implication, journals, sensors, university courses, standards, even laws. When you get lots of cheap data and the tools to process them and the conversation going on about how to use them, well, what makes sense to do is explore the way that you can use them, explore what you can do with them. And sure enough, new interesting ways of using data are popping out. It turns out that Google searches on influenza predict actual influenza epidemics. This also works with other illnesses like dengue. Tweets about rice in Indonesia, well, they correlate really well with the actual price of actual rice. Increased use of public transport predicts peaks in unemployment, and that in turn predicts decreases in private expenditure on healthcare. Share of lights turned on at night in India correlates well and in real time with GDP. My favorite. Duration, actually the distribution of duration of phone calls in the United Kingdom correlates really, really well with economic development indices at the micro level. We are all part of a data society. Hugely successful corporations offer us great services and we use them. Man, we do use them. Facebook, Google, Twitter, Gmail, Flickr, take your pick. Every time you click on a Facebook like button, you are adding information to a planetary scale database of social interaction. We are all involved. And some people are worried about this. It means step-by-step monitoring of everything we do. And sure enough, there is a certain tension with the need for privacy some of us feel. And, it's impossible not to quote the whole sad PRISM affair in the United States. For what it's worth, here's my opinion. Those worries may be right or wrong. It doesn't make a difference. They won't even slow down the advance of the data society. We need to adjust to the idea that we are leaving behind us a trail, a digital trail, and this trail will be analyzed by statisticians armed with algorithms that few of us can really comprehend. Yes, the change is coming. Yes, it will be deep. No, we are not ready. So what can we do? Well, we can ride its wave. We can become part of it. We can let it carry us towards the society we want to build, which means trying to give it a sense of direction somehow. Large quantities of data do allow humanity to do new things and to do old things in new ways. In particular, going back to open government, they allow decision makers and the citizens that collaborate with those with those decision makers on the internet to move on to a new style of doing things that relies less on planning, which doesn't work anyway, and more on monitoring and rapid reaction. Think, for example, of education. Suppose, we decided at some point that we want a reform of our education system to catch up with labor market changes. Well, it would take 10 years for the first reformed students to come out of schools. And by then, surprise, surprise, the labor market will have changed again in ways that we cannot hope to foresee. Maybe a more realistic way to go is to work with a mix of radical decentralization, which allows different schools to try different things, and real-time monitoring so that schools can learn from each other's successes and mistakes, and let the system adapt and co-evolve with the labor market. So you see, open government can be combined, at least in principle, with the data society to obtain a new hybrid which combines the openness of open government with the quantitative rigor of the data society. Today's public institutions are unable to do this, and I think they always will, unless we help them. And there are two things that we can do right now to help them move in this direction. The first, open data, always and by default. This means, by the way, upstream data hygiene. It means that you, as a public sector leader or worker, you need to design your system knowing already that your data will be seen by other people. That turns out to be very beneficial because it means you clean up what you do and you end up with a much more efficient way of working anyway. The second one is to equip the public sector with platforms to engage the citizen in such a way that you can learn from your engagement. Let me explain this with an example. So, collaboration between citizens and institutions tends to happen a lot these days on digital platforms. And as we saw before, these interactions leave a trace, right? These traces can be expressed as a graph and the properties of that graph analyzed. So what you're looking at is a graph representing the online conversation of a project that I used to direct at the Council of Europe. It was an open government exercise. The idea was to get a bunch of citizens to discuss on a proposal of reform of European youth policies. Our data seem to indicate that such conversation is reasonably scalable because as the number of users grew, so did the self-organization of the communities in groups that talked more to each other, that talked more within groups than across groups. And what that means, if this is true, and if it is true, as our data seem to indicate, that these groups roughly correspond with topics, what that means is that you can grow this conversation as much as you want, and it won't result in an increase of chaos with everybody talking to everybody else. It'll just result in an increase of specialization. And so the number of topics that this platform can tackle in parallel. Now, I don't know if this is true, but it's worth exploring, and we are exploring it. Make no mistake, Google, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter are already doing this. They are using proprietary tools. They are not sharing their results. Certainly, they are not sharing their raw data. They have a much better understanding of social interaction and its patterns than any public sector institution. And this is, in my opinion, one of the things that makes the data society potentially undemocratic. Most of the knowledge is not in democratically elected institutions, in democratically accountable institutions. Most of the knowledge is in private business. We can change this by persuading our institutions to engage on open source platforms and keep the data and open them. Of course, if you're the mayor and you want to engage with your citizens, well, opening a Facebook page is cheap, is fast, and it works. Unfortunately, however, what that means is that you and your community can never learn from the data generated by those patterns. Instead, Facebook will learn. And Facebook will use those data to do what? Well, to sell us targeted advertising. This is a private business, and very legitimately, and not only legally, but legitimately, they don't care about citizens. They want us to be consumers. I think you, as a public sector leader, can do better than that. So here's the vision that we are dreaming about. We are dreaming about some sort of data-powered open government. This is where the two themes, in my opinion, could come together. This is what I'm personally working on, and I hope to continue together with you to build this vision into a reality. Let's see how we do. Question, sorry, this was much, eso no fue tan largo como los otros, no estaba preparado, pero eso es. Si tienen preguntas, aquí estoy. ¿no? Bueno, gracias.